Have you ever felt like no matter how hard you try, nothing ever changes? Like you're stuck in the same cycle, giving your best, but getting nowhere. Maybe you've been overlooked, rejected, pushed aside one too many times. If any of this sounds familiar, you're not alone. And I need you to stay with me, because what you're about to hear may just shift the way you see your own story. She was the kind of person who always tried to smile, even when her world was falling apart. Amanda had spent most of her life trying to hold it together, for others, for appearances, for survival. But behind closed doors, she was tired. Tired of pretending. Tired of fighting battles no one else could see. What she didn't know was that everything was about to shift. Not because someone rescued her, not because her luck suddenly changed, but because of a single moment, one quiet decision that would reconnect her to the one thing she had lost the most, herself. Amanda's life wasn't marked by one big tragedy. It was something quieter, the kind of pain that builds over time. She grew up in a small town where dreams were considered dangerous, and confidence was often mistaken for arrogance. From a young age, she was taught to settle, to stay small. And every time she tried to break that mold, something or someone pushed her right back down. She went from job to job, always giving more than she was paid for, always hoping someone would finally see her value. But recognition never came. In meetings, her ideas were passed over. In relationships, she was the one who loved more. And over time, all that giving without receiving started to wear her down in ways she didn't even notice at first. By her early 30s, Amanda had become a master at hiding exhaustion. She smiled when she wanted to scream. She said, "I'm fine," when everything inside her was breaking. Bills were stacking up. Friendships faded. Her confidence had shrunk so much, she started to question if her voice even mattered anymore. She wasn't living. She was surviving. Barely. And yet, she kept going. Not because she had a plan, but because stopping felt scarier than pushing through. She thought, maybe tomorrow something will change. But tomorrow always looked a lot like yesterday. And the truth is, deep down, she was afraid that this invisible, exhausting, unrecognized life might be all she was ever going to have. It all came crashing down one rainy afternoon. Amanda had spent her last few dollars getting to a job interview, one she thought might finally be different. She wore her best outfit, rehearsed every answer, clung to every ounce of hope she had left. But after barely 2 minutes, the manager looked up and said, "We're actually looking for someone with more experience." That was it. No warmth, no follow-up, no humanity. Just another cold, familiar rejection. She walked out into the street as the rain began to fall. Not a dramatic downpour, but that slow, icy drizzle that soaks into your bones. The kind that makes the world look even grayer than it already feels. Her shoes filled with water. Her bag strap snapped in the middle of the sidewalk. She tried to hold herself together, but her face was wet with more than just rain. The city moved around her like she didn't exist. She waited for the bus, arms crossed, trying not to cry in public. Again, every part of her body ached, not from physical pain, but from carrying disappointment for too long. In that moment, she wasn't angry. She wasn't even sad. She was just empty, emotionally bankrupt, like life had taken every ounce of energy she had and left nothing but silence. When she got home, she dropped her things at the door and sat on the floor of her dark apartment. She didn't turn on the lights. She didn't even take off her shoes. Time passed without meaning. Her mind replayed everything she'd done wrong in her life, over and over again. Every missed chance, every bad decision, every almost, that became never. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen table. Another unpaid bill. She didn't check. What was the point? And then, in the stillness, something strange happened. Not a voice, not a motivational speech, just a single thought, buried under the weight of everything. Maybe no one's coming. Maybe this is it. And then another thought followed, just as quietly. But if this really is the end, maybe I get to choose what happens next. That shift wasn't loud, but it was real. And in that fragile space where surrender and rebirth touched, something inside Amanda woke up. The next morning, Amanda did something she hadn't done in weeks. She opened a notebook. It was dusty, buried under papers she hadn't touched in months. She didn't plan what to write. She didn't think about spelling or structure. She just let the pain spill onto the page, the kind of truth you only tell yourself when no one's watching. She wrote about feeling invisible, about how hard it was to care so much and receive so little, about the constant noise in her head telling her she wasn't good enough. And then, without realizing it, she wrote one line that changed everything. "What if my story isn't over yet?" She stared at those words for a long time. They didn't solve her problems, but they unlocked something, because in that moment, she remembered. She still had a voice. Maybe the world hadn't listened before, but maybe it wasn't about being heard by others. Maybe it was about finally hearing herself. Later that week, she shared one of her journal entries on social media. Not for likes or validation, but because she felt that maybe, just maybe, someone else out there needed to hear it too. She almost deleted it after posting. But she didn't. And to her surprise, it didn't disappear into the void. People responded, not with pity, but with connection. One person wrote, "I've felt the same way for years. Thank you for saying what I couldn't." Another said, "Your words made me feel seen." For the first time in her life, Amanda realized that her pain had value, that what she had survived could help someone else survive too. And that realization, that her voice mattered, even if only to one person, changed everything. It didn't fix her problems overnight, but it gave her a reason to keep going. And that reason was hers. Amanda didn't become a new person overnight. She didn't suddenly wake up early, smile more, and get her dream job. But that single moment, that one journal entry, was the first brick in a new foundation. She began writing every morning, not because she felt inspired, but because it helped her understand herself. It became her way of rebuilding from the inside out. She started walking, not as a workout, but as a practice, step by step around the block, just enough to remind herself she was still here. She unfollowed people who drained her, cleared out the clutter in her apartment, ate her meals at the table instead of on the couch. None of these were dramatic changes, but each one whispered the same message: I'm worth showing up for. With time, her writing reached more people. A small community began to form around her voice. She never called herself a coach or a mentor, but her words made others feel less alone. She began speaking at local meetups, hosting quiet circles where people could share their struggles without judgment. She took courses she once thought she wasn't good enough for, reapplied to jobs she had once been afraid to even consider. Her world wasn't changing by chance. It was changing because she was finally choosing herself. She wasn't chasing success anymore. She stopped measuring her worth by productivity or recognition. Instead, she focused on being present, intentional, and kind, not just to others, but finally to herself. She made time for solitude, reflection, and small joys. Her life was still imperfect, still full of challenges, but now she faced them with a steady heart. And for the first time, she saw herself not as someone who had failed, but as someone who had risen. Quietly, powerfully, on her own terms. Amanda's story isn't about becoming someone new. It's about finally seeing the value in who she had been all along. The girl who kept going even when no one clapped. The woman who gave her heart even when it was bruised. The version of herself that didn't need fixing, just nurturing, honoring, and believing. Sometimes we wait for life to hand us a breakthrough. But Amanda's moment didn't come from the outside. It came from a whisper inside her, one that had been quiet for years, drowned out by fear, exhaustion, and self-doubt. And when she chose to listen, her life began to change, one honest step at a time. You may be in a season right now that feels endless. Maybe your story looks a lot like hers. Maybe you felt invisible, unheard, or like nothing you've done has made a difference. But let this be your reminder. Transformation doesn't always start with a miracle. Sometimes it starts with a question, a decision, a sentence in a journal that says, "Maybe I'm not done yet." And if this story moved something inside you, don't stop here. Click the video that's waiting on the left side of your screen. It's about a woman who thought no one cared about what she said, until one day, the CEO himself revealed he had been listening all along. And what happened next changed everything. For more inspiring stories to transform your life and become better, whether at work or in your personal development, subscribe to the channel and stay up to date with the best advice and learnings.